Uh-oh. We on part 4 of this bad boy of the Book of Aquarius and the true Philosopher's Stone. Yo, I'm so glad that y'all are here with me. Um, I think it's really important that we just understand that we are trying to reveal one particular secret which has been kept for the longest of times, which has been known for such a long time as well. The elixir of life, the fountain of youth, everything that goes in relation to all of the long lasting substance that allows you to live longer and elevate life or elongate life in itself is the true philosopher's stone. It's the highest attainment. Everything in nature is aiming towards the higher path, the higher, moving up consistently. That's what nature has always been. It will always be on its own. That's what it is. And we have to start realizing, are we as people within ourselves, even not even looking into other people, but are we ourselves seeking and attaining the higher? And I'm not talking about more money. I'm not talking about more things. I'm talking about your spiritual development of understanding who you are. And I know alchemy is not about that. It's been changed over to that. There's no lie. They've made it more about a spiritual aspect, the inner rising of the Christos, the inner rising of the sacred oil. We've spoken about this in God, Man 1 and 2, George Carey. But there is a physical aspect of it too, and on an elemental basis, and that's how it literally works. And it's like we've forgotten that. Not so much that we've forgotten it, but that it's been taken away from us, right? The indoctrination, the education, the dumbing down, believing more in matter than in spiritual whatsoever. And then anything that's just in relation to the spiritual aspect is looked at or frowned upon because of the materialism, right? They want that materialism to take over so that all of the unknown or phenomenon aspect of things is just taken away, right? Because the more that matter is in control, the more that man has domination, power, and control. The more that the spirit reigns in the understanding of the ether and the all supreme and natural or nature in itself, the more that they lose all control. Because the understanding that there is an all-encompassing powerful force that is here within us at all points in times, that is here around us at any point in time. And these things are just phenomenal because it allows us to move forward into our understanding and on an enlightened path to elevate society in all of its capacity. So let's just continue reading. We're going to be now in the section of interpretations. Okay. Art has no haters but the ignorant. A golden and blessed casket of nature's marvels by Benedictus Figulus in 1607. The alchemical writings are obscure and often misinterpreted. Since the writings are so obscure, it's a perfect discipline for someone who wants to look more important than they are to pretend to understand. As long as no one else understands it, either then they can safely go on misleading people and pretending to be important and mystical. I want to make it clear that there is only one correct interpretation. So again, see, it's not all about, there's only one correct interpretation, and if we've moved it into a different meaning along the way, we'll keep going. I will discuss some common alternative interpretations and misunderstandings in this part. The modern popular opinion is that alchemy is a spiritual discipline. This idea arose in the 19th and early 20th centuries, along with the theosophical movement and occult revival. The reason for its popularity was simply because it was a way for people who don't understand the obscure terms to pretend that they do understand them. These people proceeded to write books themselves on spiritual alchemy, which are mere folly. Quote, the spiritual interpretation of alchemy that was made famous by Jung, in fact reflects religious convictions typical of 19th century occultism, and it is not supported by the antique and medieval alchemical sources. Unquote. On the Edge of the Future by Jeffrey John Kripal and Glenn W. Schuck, 2005. Spiritual alchemy only became believable when the Philosopher's Stone was no longer believed in. Prior to the 19th century, this only started when alchemy fell into disrepute. Prior to the 19th century, no single person ever wrote anything about alchemy being spiritual. This started when alchemy fell into disrepute. It was clear to many self-styled philosophers in the 19th century that alchemy had been praised and studied by so many great minds throughout history. The only way to explain this was to, one, either admit that they were not wise enough to work out how to make the stone, or two, pretend that they were wise enough by inventing an alternative interpretation. Spiritual alchemy appeared to make sense of the writings of the alchemists, assuming that the Philosopher's Stone is not real. And only if one were to read selectively just a few alchemical books, the way of the spiritual interpreters is to find any word that could sound spiritual, such as spirit, body, living gold, philosophical mercury, etc. They then jump on this word as evidence of their claim, even though it is evident that these words refer to either the water or salt of a substance from which we can make the stone. See? And that's what's truly happened. The occultism, theosophy, philosophy itself, the whole genre, there have been a select few who have taken the alchemical text, switched up a couple words to mean what they wanted to, and then finagled that. So then you come to these days and everybody's about the occultism, which is good. Again, you're only imitating nature, which is reaching the higher enlightenment, moving up, right? So, if that be the case, raising the Christos, however one of people term it, okay? If that be the case, then the art was lost in its interpretation. It was taken away by those who knew what it was and then indoctrinated. Same way that it's taught about, like, the people within the U.S. and who was here truly first, and how the whole slave trade narrative, Pan-Africanism, all of that is starting to dwindle away, but has been put in front of all of us to fool us so that they have more control over this land. So, it's just really putting the pieces together and seeing how in every way there are certain control mechanisms put in place by those who are the most powerful in the world today. It's not very hard to see. Unfortunately, many alchemical classics were adulterated during the 19th century, the Corpus Hermeticum, in order to make them sound more spiritual. At the same time, new spiritual alchemy books were published under the name of older alchemists, when they were in fact new publications. See the hijack, the injection of information that is not accurate. Happens all the time. Although it is easy to tell the cultural origin of books by the style of writing, these books continue to fool people and are used as sources to support the spiritual interpretation. Quote, hundreds of books, including adulterated translations of alchemical classics, appeared in the second half of the 19th century, all but a very few embracing this new spiritual interpretation of alchemy, unquote. Newton and Newtonism by James E. Force and Sarah Hutton in 2005. So the spiritual interpreters go further by suggesting that the alchemists had to hide their spiritual philosophy under obscurity, since the kings and the church in their time would have prosecuted them for blasphemy. So you see exactly what I'm saying. They getting prosecuted out here, y'all. They getting killed out here. They getting hanged for doing this practice, y'all. This ain't like they trying to shut that down. You're done, okay? We got control, okay? Jesus is number one. You bow down, okay? It is what it is. Like, take it for what it, because they wasn't letting go. They had to have control. This claim sounds believable if we are to read it and nod our heads without thinking about it. But if we think about it, we see that, number one, various saints and monks in the same period spoke very clearly about spirituality without any problem. And two, the kings and church were actually prosecuting the alchemists anyway. And three, since the alchemists were already being prosecuted for claiming they can make gold, all they would have to do is admit that they were actually talking about spirituality and they would be safe. Getting smart on them, right? So now we'll have to play the two to be able to speak our lingo without getting prosecuted. It's the same as when people are, talking about the virus thing and they had to say CV-19 or they had to say the bug or use whatever terminology because of the censor aspect of just speaking truth, just your opinion, honestly, your unalienable right? So it says, quote, "A purely spiritual alchemy would never explain the existence of alchemical laboratories in which physicians honestly and fanatically sought for occult medicines," unquote. Man, Myth, and Magic by Richard Cavendish and Brian Innes in 1983. Spiritual alchemy is the emperor's new clothes. Everyone pretends to understand it, but no one really does. There is nobody on earth who could explain the why and how of spiritual alchemy and successfully decode entire alchemical books using this interpretation. This is why the idea has stuck, simply because no one understands it. And so there is no argument against those who believe it, as how can you argue against someone who blindly believes something with no evidence? That being said, since the creation of the philosopher's stone follows fundamental laws of nature, and since fundamental laws hold true on every level in every situation, then the same laws which apply to the creation of the stone also hold true to spiritual development. But the spiritual interpreters of alchemy do not follow those fundamental laws, since they do not understand alchemy, and so they are still wrong. My argument against the spiritual interpretations is not that alchemy does not apply to spirituality. Of course it does, but my argument is against the concept that alchemy is primarily spiritual. Alchemy is primarily concerned with the physical reality, and all the authors of the alchemy books were writing about a physical substance, which is easy to see from the quotes provided in this book. However, all fundamental truths apply on every level, and since the physical reality is a reflection of the spiritual reality, then of course the same does apply to both levels. If the spiritual interpreters of alchemy actually understood alchemy, then they would understand this, and therefore understand that the authors were writing about a physical substance. This is the point. Other people are indeed convinced that alchemy is practical, but they just can't get their head around the fact that it's very simple and follows the laws of nature. Many people have invented chemical processes. The white stone of urine, which they developed by reading only one or two alchemical books and taking the metaphorical parts of the writings literally. From reading alchemy, they invent complicated chemical processes which are far away from the actions of nature, and set about doing all kinds of fruitless experiments. They obviously get nowhere, and then decide to tell everyone else how to go wrong too. I should say a few words about Ormus, also called Orms, or white powdered gold, which many people are describing and marketing as the Philosopher's Stone. And again, I have been asked many times if I am talking about the same thing. Ormus is a method to obtain very small particles of charged metals. This is not the stone, and it is not alchemy. It is not imitating nature. There may well be health benefits to ingesting Ormus, but the claim made that Ormus is the stone is a little silly. It's like calling a chicken a cow. A chicken is not a cow. It does not look like a cow, and it does not act like a cow. Ormus is not made like the stone. It does not look like the stone. It does not act like the stone. It is not the stone. There is no reason whatsoever for anyone to believe that Ormus is the same as the stone, other than this is what they have previously been told. And if what I am saying here applies to you, then you need to consider what you believe, who you are listening to, and whether you should continue to base your beliefs on the opinions of others presented with no evidence to support their claim. It is very easy to tell if a procedure is true or not. You just ask yourself the following questions. Do you understand how it works? Do you understand why it works? Does it follow the cycles and laws of nature? If the answer is yes to all these questions, then you're onto something. Nature is the grand master of alchemy and the true teacher. So it is the nature to whom you must look to if you intend to base your beliefs on truths. My words now will mean nothing to you unless you can sacrifice a little bit of your ego and look to nature to see what is true and what is false. Nature has nothing to learn from us, but we have much to learn from nature. To accept this enables us to listen to what nature has to say, which is all around us, and nature is never wrong. If the interpretation is wrong, then it will not fit. And so you know it is wrong. If one wants to write about spiritual development or chemistry, then this is all fine and dandy, but don't go calling it alchemy. I even came across a modern alchemy book in which the reader is asked not to read the old alchemy books because they're too obscure and will only confuse you. Quote from this book: "Notwithstanding, the reader is warned against hazard reading of alchemical books, for this will lead to mental confusion and finally desperation of ever learning anything. Once started on alchemical research, however, this becomes a great temptation and a bad fault. One tends to read vicariously any alchemical book that comes to hand. This one book, closely studied, is however all that is necessary for practical experiment." Unquote. This is impressively ignorant. It looks to me that this author just wants to look cool and mystical, and of course they know that they got nowhere, but they are happy to deceive others and pretend they are important. Quote, "A man who fails to recognize the Wu Xing 5 elements and the 4 signs is certainly one who will be befuddled and differentiate cinnabar, mercury, lead, and silver. He has never even heard of the principle of the fire and the season for compounding tan, and he dares to say that he is a great devotee of Taoism. Never considering his mistake, he teaches others in turn and teaches mistakenly. He ruins the mercury of others by misleading them into an uncharted port. How can one have the heart to do this?" Unquote. Wu Qin Piyin, Essay on the Understanding of Truth by Chang Po Tuan, 1078 AD. With the correct interpretation as I present here now, you will understand, number 1, what alchemy is, number 2, why it works, and number 3, how it works. No other interpretation can give you this. They only rely on blind faith, since that is the only way to believe a lie. Notice how I can back up any statement I make in regards to alchemical theory and practice with several quotes from a variety of alchemical books. You will not find this with any other interpretation. Notice how I explain not only how alchemy works, but why alchemy works. Notice how you can actually understand what I say, and it makes sense with nature. This is what truth looks like. But it's been so long since many people have been able to see truth that they've forgotten what it looks like. It is, of course, all inevitable that the stone would be forgotten and the books misinterpreted. And it's not as though I mind these interpretations in any way, since I have no problem understanding the real alchemical books in the first place. But the purposes here is to put a stop to further disinformation and lies.